Good morning, everyone. Joined today by many people. We have the Treasurer, Matt Kean, the Minister for Women, Bronnie Taylor, the Minister for Health, Brad Hazzard. We have the President of Chief Executive Women, Sam Mostyn. We also have the Founder and CEO of Super Rewards, Pascal Hellier-Moret, who will speak to us today about our new program which we are launching. And in addition to that, we have Dr. Jeremy McAnulty to provide a public health update. And that's it. Okay, so I'll begin by saying I think what a great day it is here in New South Wales, and I really do believe we are back on the front foot. If we look over the course of the weekend, activities returning, cafes are busy, restaurants are pumping, even here in the CBD on the weekend, Pitt Street Mall was bustling, and that is a great thing for our state. And I want to thank every person right across New South Wales for the continuous effort and sacrifices they are making. We are in this strong position because of everything we've done over 2 years, those sacrifices, those efforts, the efforts in relation to vaccination, having one of the highest vaccines, ensure that our state, from a health perspective, in a strong position, that then translates into a strong economic response as well. So I thank everybody for that. I'll talk about boosters in a few moments, but once again, we need to continue that concerted effort to get boosted, because all the evidence is very clear that boosters, not just here in New South Wales, but around Australia and around the world, are key to keeping you safe and having less severe symptoms with the virus in front of us. So it's great to see that many people are out and about, but there's still more work to do. So today, the Treasurer and myself have launched the Sydney Summit number 3. And when something works, you keep doing it. That's exactly what we're doing here in our state. Following the outbreak during Alpha and then Delta, we held these summits in Sydney, bringing together business leaders, small business owners, large business owners, corporations, the council, the mayor, who all came together and worked through initiatives to bring life back into the CBD. And that's going to be incredibly important again as we move through to the end of February, when restrictions are eased, when people come back to the city. We want to ensure that we bounce back better, that there's a very strong response here in the Sydney CBD, just like we saw last year. And we should all have confidence in what we saw last year following difficult times, that New South Wales came back stronger. These summits make a real difference. It's not just governments that have the best ideas, and we're seeing that today when I speak about the Women's Economic Opportunity Review. And governments play a role, but it's also the role of governments to listen to people outside government, to hear new ideas, to hear fresh ideas in relation to what we can implement to make things better. And we certainly saw that in terms of some of the restrictions that were lifted in terms of al fresco dining last year in the Sydney CBD, and a whole range of festivals and events in partnership with the local council, some change the council made to make the city easier to wine and dine and enjoy the best that our city and state has to offer. And to help with that, as you know, we've launched the parents' vouchers today, $250 in vouchers for accommodation and tourism. I want to thank parents, particularly for the homeschooling sacrifices they've made over the last 2 years. I think the return to school, both here and in Victoria, has gone incredibly successfully over the last week. I've said there'll be bumps along the road. I know already there are children who have had to isolate, teachers who have had to isolate, but we can't let perfection be the enemy of the good. We had the teachers' union out numerous times. It's not teachers' union, sorry. They're actually quite supportive. The doctors' union saying the kids should be back in the classroom. Well, they are wrong. They've been proven to be wrong. The most important place where our kids can be is in the classroom, learning, playing with their friends, having that interaction, not just for their social outcomes, but also for their mental health outcomes as well. I want to thank all of our teachers across the state for the work they've done in ensuring that it's been as smooth sailing as possible. I accept that it won't necessarily all be easy, but in the main, it has gone incredibly well. And I want to thank parents for their patience, for continuing to do those rapid antigen tests. I know they're annoying. I'm doing them myself. It's incredibly painful, but we're getting through it, and the kids are loving being back in the classroom. So we've got that's in place for the next few weeks. So I just want to ask you to continue that effort as we move through. Today, as has been reported, we are launching our Women's Economic Opportunity Review Panel, which is being chaired by Sam Mostyn. I want to thank the Treasurer and the Minister for Women for their work in this space. There are a number of areas that we'll be looking at addressing that will assist the government in formulating policy in the lead up to this year's budget, but also beyond that. This is about long-term strategic policy thinking, which will look at a range of issues to assist women in terms of entering the workforce, re-entering and staying in the workforce as we move forward. And we know in a modern world that many of the policy objectives that we've had over the past are not set for where we are today. And looking at areas like superannuation, like pay parity, like before and after school care and early childhood education and childcare. These are issues that have not been looked at for a substantial period of time. And in fact, what we have seen with different levels and layers of responsibility from a federal and state level, that they are not looked at in a way that actually drives better outcomes for women and for families across our state. I've spoken in the past about the importance and where we would, from a state perspective, look at our responsibilities in the area of childcare. We are very happy to take it over. Obviously, there's a financial cost to that, and that would need to be worked out. But the reason we say that is because from long day care to before and after school care to early child education to childcare, it's an absolute dog's breakfast. And when that occurs, you don't get the best policy outcomes that support women and that support families across the state. So I believe the initiative from the Minister for Women and the Treasurer today, getting some of the best and brightest minds across our state to look at how we can empower and provide better opportunities for women in balancing work and family life and having better opportunities in the workplace when it comes to pay, when it comes to superannuation. These are areas governments need to look at, not just for the short term, but for the long term as well. So I'm very much looking forward to the outcomes that the panel provides to the government. This is exactly what good government should be doing. Yes, we get advice from the public sector, but we need to go out on the coalface, see where those challenges are, and look at innovative and new ways of doing things. There's no reason, for example, when we talk about schooling, that the time for school, the school hours are 9 till 3. That was set up at a very, very different time in life. And we are a government that we're looking always at better ways of doing things, of thinking outside the box and striking new direction moving forward. And I'm very confident this panel will provide great advice to myself as Premier, the Minister for Women, and the Treasurer as we lead into the budget, and importantly beyond. This is not just about the budget in terms of the short term, this is about long-term policy plays that we can work towards at a state level and also engage our federal counterparts in looking at better ways of doing things. But I can tell you this, you're not going to get better outcomes if you have different layers of government having responsibility across the whole area, because no one ends up being responsible. There is no synergies that are in place. And if no one is responsible, then what happens is you do not get the outcomes that will help working mums and dads across the state. So I'm very pleased to announce this review today. Finally, boosters. We say in every press conference, I want to reiterate this message today. If it has been 3 months since your second dose vaccination, or you've had COVID between 4 and 6 weeks, please go and receive that booster shot. We're, I think, tick below 48%, 47.8% today in those of the eligible population who have received a booster. I was out with Minister Hazzard yesterday at our Homebush vaccination hub. We met people who had made a booking in the morning and were there by the afternoon. The queues outside those centres have dissipated. There is significant opportunity for people to come to one of our 40 hubs across our state, or in addition to that, making that appointment through your GP or through your pharmacist. I know people have made efforts for 2 years, significant sacrifices for 2 years. But where we sit today, the success of our state in dealing with COVID from a health perspective and an economic perspective all comes back to the efforts that we've made day in, day out, and vaccination has been key to that. That's why if you look at the hospitalisations, if you look at ICU presentations, if you look at the death rate here in New South Wales compared to almost anywhere else in the world, we're in an incredibly strong position. That's not just because of the government, that's because of you and the efforts that you've made. We've just got to keep that effort up. We've just got to keep that effort up as we move through this period of time. We need to get that booster shot level back to a much higher level than where it is today. So I want to finish by thanking everybody. Thanks for the efforts. Thank you for the sacrifices. We're doing well. New South Wales is back on the front foot. If you're a mum and dad out there today, download your vouchers. If it crashes, I'm sorry. That's not a bad thing. That shows that everyone wants these vouchers. They've been incredibly successful in the past. Dine and Discover, the accommodation vouchers that are coming our way as well. Please go out and use these vouchers. It's important in terms of putting downward pressure on household budgets. We want to support families across the state. We said it's a government that puts families first. It's exactly the approach we're taking. But importantly, please also support those businesses that have been doing it tough. Accommodation, tourism, get out and about and enjoy the best that Sydney and New South Wales has to offer. I am now going to pass to Minister for Women, I'm sure, Bronnie Taylor.
Thank you very much, Premier, and what a great day for women in New South Wales. It is really exciting to be here today to talk about this review that's happening. But this is about the work that's been going on behind the scenes to make sure that women are able to thrive in this great state of New South Wales, because we know that when women thrive, our communities thrive, our families thrive, and we have a much better outcome. We've seen a lot of challenges with COVID, but we've also seen opportunities. And those opportunities have come in all different shapes and sizes, but I think that it has highlighted the opportunities that we can provide for women. I'd like to say a big thank you to the Treasurer and to the Premier for backing this review in. And it gives me so much pride to stand here with these incredible women behind me in Sam and Pascal, who will speak to you later, about this review. And as the Premier said, we know that we need to hear from women themselves, and we need to hear from experts in government. And that's what good government does. It listens to people on the ground, and it listens to people that are in this space. This panel reflects a really high calibre of people that are going to deliver those suggestions, deliver those ideas, and deliver those policy platforms, not only for today, but for the next 5 years and the next 10 years. Because we draw a line in the sand today, and we say as a government in New South Wales, this is important. This is something that we need to do. And this is something that's not only going to benefit young women who are 5 years old, who are 12 years old, or who are 68 years old. This is going to benefit everybody in the long term. And I'm really, really pleased about that. I've taken advice from my Council for Women's Economic Opportunity over the last 3 years since I've had the great privilege of being the Minister for Women in New South Wales. And what they are telling me is that we need to see changes. The Premier talked about school hours and school days, and when you talk to women, they'll often talk about that hard cut-off at 3 o'clock. We need to look at different opportunities to make sure that they can thrive. Because it's not only important for the state, and it's not only important for their physical health, it's important for our mental health as well. So I'd just like to say, to leave you with this last thing, that I look really forward to working with the Treasurer and ensuring that the next budget in New South Wales places women at the front and centre, and I have no doubt that he will deliver on that. Thanks.
Well, thank you, Minister Taylor. And I thank Stone and Chalk for hosting us here today. I'm delighted to be here today to announce our review into creating economic opportunities for women here in New South Wales. What's clear is that women's ability to participate and thrive in the New South Wales economy is not the same as it is for men in this state. That is not acceptable in 21st century New South Wales. Women's participation rate in New South Wales is 9% lower than their male counterparts. When women retire from their jobs, their superannuation balances are 2/3 what it is for their male counterparts. And we know that women only make up 1/3 of directors on our ASX listed companies. Now, the women I speak to, the women of my generation, They're frustrated that they're the only female that often walks into a room in the workplace. They're frustrated that their ideas are overlooked compared to their male counterparts. They're frustrated that too often they have to choose between having a family and having a career in a way that men don't have to think about. That is not acceptable. We know that this is not just the right thing to do for our society, it's the right thing to do for our economy. We know that in New South Wales, that if we lift the female participation rate to that of male participation rate, we will see our economy 8% larger by 2060, and it will lift household incomes on average by $22,000 per household per annum. That is a huge step change. So again, this is not just the right thing to do by our society, this is the right thing to do by our economy. So today, I'm very proud to be announcing an outstanding trailblazer when it comes to women's participation, women's economic opportunity in the brilliant Sam Mostyn. Sam will be heading the expert panel that will guide Treasury in putting together the package that will shape our budget this June. The focus of this review will be ensuring that women can stay, enter and re-enter the workforce. It will also focus on ensuring that when they are in the workforce, they will get a better experience than what they've had in the past. And that's why we're looking at things like the gender pay gap, supporting women's leadership and empowering our female entrepreneurs. In addition to that, the review will focus on early childhood education. We know that many women, particularly in their 30s, drop out of the labour force as many make the choice to raise a family. We want to make sure that no woman should have to choose between having a family and having a career. That's why early childhood education is going to be a key part of this focus. It's not just about ensuring that women are able to reach their potential, it's also about ensuring that our kids are able to reach their potential. We know that the investment that we make in kids under 5 will enable them to thrive for the whole of their lives. So this will also see a long-term productivity benefit delivered for our entire economy, not just here in New South Wales, but indeed right across the country. So I'm excited about this review. I'm thrilled that Sam Mostyn has taken on this challenge, and I'm looking forward to delivering a comprehensive women's economic package as part of our budget, which will be shaped by a diverse range of experienced voices that will ensure that New South Wales is the best place for women to live, to work and to raise a family. This is not just about fairness, this is about the prosperity of everyone in this state, and I want to make sure that under a Perrottet government, New South Wales leads the way. I'll now hand over to Sam Mostyn to say a few words about her role in the review.
Well, thank you to the Premier, to Minister Taylor and the Treasurer, both for their comments this morning that give you a sense of the ambition the New South Wales Government has in initiating this review, but also for allowing a group of independent experts to be appointed to assist in this important work. When the Treasurer rang me to ask me if I would consider chairing this expert panel, he said he wanted us to be bold and brave. And I think you can hear from the language this morning that that is echoed by Minister Taylor and the Premier. And we will be bold and we will be brave. As the Premier, the Minister and the Treasurer have already explained, the case for women's economic engagement in our society is well made. We knew about it before COVID, and we knew about it through what we like to call, and the academics call, the gaps and traps that women face across the country, and particularly here in New South Wales, where our focus will land. The gaps in opportunity, gaps in pay, gaps in leadership, they're things that women have got very used to across the state because it's been our normal life. And the traps are the big systemic problems that come, as the Treasurer has pointed out, about the issues of childcare, early childcare education and learning, the lack of good, flexible work that doesn't just benefit women but benefits families. Those gaps and traps have defined the inability for economies to work properly because of the absence of women fulfilling their greatest power, which is our full contribution to our economy and our society. And if we needed a further reminder, it came in the form of COVID. COVID and the experience of the last 3 years has exacerbated and further increased a lot of the disadvantage that women have felt and were feeling before COVID. So to be approached by a Treasurer backed by a Premier and the Minister for Women and the Minister for Education here in New South Wales. I couldn't say no. The panellists we chose as our expert panel were all delighted to join. We're very clear we are not a fully representative panel. We're an expert panel that have been brought together to assist with the work of Treasury and to make sure that the work that leads up to the budget, to budget measures and to the longer term narrative for what it will take to fix the long-term structural barriers for women's full inclusion in New South Wales, in its society, in its businesses, in its communities and in the economy is met by down payments that we made in the upcoming budget, but met by longer-term structural reform. And I have the confidence with the way in which the panel has been set up and the way in which the review has been constructed that the work we'll do in the short term for the budget will reflect a strong budget that supports women all around the state in all of the areas you've already heard about, but will not let go of a narrative that says across New South Wales, across the next decade, formal work to be done on the structural disadvantages that women face that will be seen in broader policy and budgets to come. The last thing I'd just like to say is that one of our panel members, Maha Abdo, who's the Chief Executive of Muslim Women Australia, pointed out in our first meeting that we were able to have just recently that it's her ambition for us as an expert panel to ensure that the budget and the policies that affect women across this state reflect an ideal and a process by which every woman's voice across the state is both heard and that women are seen wherever they are, whether they sit in New South Wales, not just in the cities but the regions, in the suburbs and whatever they're choosing to do to be contributors to our great state. So I'm delighted to lead the panel. I'm looking forward to working with Treasury and the Treasurer and Minister Taylor and Minister Mitchell, and I hope this will be the start of some wonderful outcomes, not just for women, but for our economy and our communities that all will enjoy. Thank you.
On behalf of Super Awards, I welcome this review and thank all involved in its genesis. The challenges facing women from an economic and equality perspective are persistent and daunting. 12 years ago, Australia ranked 15th compared to other countries when measured on different facets of equality: economic security, political participation, etc. Now we rank 45th. Men take home $25,500 each year, more than women in pay, as a result of the gender pay gap, which starts with female graduates earning 11% less than their male counterparts. The fastest growing demographic of homeless people is the older women. Women retire with only enough money for 5 years of retirement, and that's a modest retirement, but they live another 15 years after that. But it isn't any wonder. As a nation, this economic disadvantage starts early. We pay our daughters 27% less pocket money than we pay our sons. Therefore, any government initiative to improve the economic security for the women of New South Wales in a sustained manner is warmly welcomed. The review will consider the key systemic deficiencies of childcare, education and flexible work, all of which keep women out of the workforce. Currently, 1 in 4 women of working age is not in the workforce, and the long-term effects translates into a gender superannuation gap where women retire with approximately 2/3 as much superannuation as men. I'm confident that the review-driven measures undertaken by the government will have immediate and visible impact for the women of New South Wales. And critically, that it will also translate to economic benefits for women in their future, with better retirement outcomes. This aligns exactly with our vision at Super Awards, where users grow their super by earning cash back on their everyday spend. So once again, I'd like to thank the Premier, the Treasurer, Minister for Women and Sam Mostyn for bringing us what is this great day for the women of New South Wales.
Good morning, and good morning, Premier, and good morning, everyone. I'm here to give an update on the COVID public health situation for New South Wales. So across New South Wales, more than 95% of people aged 16 years and over have received their first dose of COVID vaccine, and 94.1% have received 2 doses as of Saturday. Of children aged 12 to 15 years, 83.4% have received their first dose, and 78.7% have received 2 doses. Of children aged 5 to 11, 43.1% have received their first dose, and of people aged 16 and over, 43.8% have now received a 3rd dose of vaccine. Sadly, we're reporting the deaths of 14 people today who had been diagnosed with COVID, 9 men and 5 women. Of the 14 people who died, one person was in their 40s, one person in their 50s, 2 were in their 60s, 5 were in their 70s, 3 were in their 80s, and 2 people were in their 90s. 2 people who died who were under 65, these 2 men were not vaccinated and had significant underlying health conditions. Of the 14 people who died, 2 people had received 3 doses of the COVID vaccine, 7 had received 2 doses, 1 had received 1 dose, and 4 had not been vaccinated. We'd like to express our sincere condolences to the family and loved ones of the people who've died. There are currently 2,099 people with COVID admitted to hospital in New South Wales, including 137 people in intensive care, 60 of whom are ventilated. In terms of testing numbers, there were 7,437 positive test results notified in 24 hours to 4 o'clock yesterday, including 3,917 from rapid antigen tests and 3,520 from positive PCR tests. Thanks very much.
First of all, I'd like to talk about some of the good news, and the good news is that we are commencing today recommencing the non-urgent elective surgery that was suspended on the 10th of January. I want to thank all of the patients who have understood the need to free up spaces in our hospitals for the potential COVID patients that we were seeing on the forecasts. Obviously, we've still got quite a substantial number of people with COVID in our hospital system, but it's less than the forecasts. And accordingly, today, 7th of February, we are able to recommence our non-urgent elective surgery, and private hospitals are working with the public hospitals, and we are anticipating that each of those private hospitals and the broader public health system will be working towards, in a staged way, getting back up to 75% of the pre-10th of January position and the pre-pandemic levels. So to the patients who have missed out in the last few weeks as a result of the necessary suspension, I just want to say thank you for your understanding. I know it's pretty tough, particularly you've got a knee that's bothering you or a hip, or one of the items of surgery, cataract surgery, one of the items that has had to be put off for a few weeks. I apologise on behalf of the health system, but I also know that each of us would understand that in a 100-year pandemic we've had to take measures that allowed for the possibility of those patients coming into our system. Can I also say that in regard to boosters, first of all, we just heard from Dr. McAnulty that sadly 14 people passed away in the last 24 hours. Of those 14 people, 12 of those people were not fully boosted. Now, I'm sure we all care and have concerns for the families and the friends of those people who've passed away, and I certainly express my condolences and sympathy to the family and friends of those 14 people. But I would say we all have an obligation. We all have an obligation here to remind our friends and our family of the importance of going and getting boosted. We know that you are far less likely to end up with serious illness, far less likely to have it transmitted to you or to transmit to someone else, far less likely to end up in ICU, far less likely to die. So I would encourage each of us to be ambassadors for the goal of getting everybody boosted. Please go out and tell your family and tell your friends to get boosted. It will keep us all that much safer. Obviously, to the broader community, can I just say, we managed to do it so well in New South Wales. We really have led the country. We've led most of the world in getting to have almost 95% of people double vaccinated, and that was incredible. But we're still sitting around about 45% of people who have had the booster. So there's a missing 50%. I would just say to each of those people, go and book in for your booster now. As the Premier said earlier, he and I had the privilege to meet quite a number of people yesterday out at the Homebush Vaccination Centre, and a number of them were saying they literally made the phone call yesterday morning, or they got online to nsw.gov.au, and I stress that, nsw.gov.au is your pass to be able to book a vaccination today if you want it, and I would suggest you should have it today. But if you prefer to go to your pharmacist or prefer to go to your GP, they're fairly busy at this time of the year, it might take 2 or 3 weeks, that's your choice. But personally I would say to you, get it wherever you can and get it fast. Thank you.
Minister. Your government's been in power for more than 10 years. You were treasurer for almost 5 of those. How is it just now that you've worked out the gender inequality issue?
Well, it's not. We've had a range of initiatives over a period of time, particularly we're proud of the work and women's initiatives that we've had here in our state. In fact, in the last budget, we had a range of initiatives in terms of supporting women with hyperemesis, which the health ministry has been focused on. We're the first state in the country to provide paid leave for those women who've suffered a miscarriage or a stillbirth. We led the way. We led the country in relation to those initiatives. We've always looked at ways in which we can bring downward pressure and look at flexibility in relation to early childhood education, which is in the state's responsibility. These are areas that we've always been focused on, and I've focused on them as Treasurer for 5 years. But as we move through this next phase, with a new team and a new government, and one with youth and innovation on its side. Sorry, Brad. Governments always need to be looking outside the box and innovative ways of doing things, and that's exactly the guidance I've given, the direction that I have given my ministerial team as we move through. And I want people to be looking, going outside governments, going outside the government public service, to look at those new ways, to look at where the need is. To not just follow what's occurred in the past and say, well, that's just going to be good public policy. I want New South Wales to be the innovation state of this country, if not the world. And I believe that we can do it. And that you're not going to do that if you're just continuing to follow the old same advice of the past. You've got to break down the barriers. You've got to break down who's responsible for various areas of government, or you won't achieve anything. And so we'll be driving that in this state. I believe that Sam will do a phenomenal job with the panel around her to provide that advice into both the Treasurer and the Minister for Women as part of the budget process. It's not just this issue, it's a whole range of issues that we'll be looking at. But we've got an incredibly strong track record in this state over 10 years. But if you keep doing the same thing, you won't get anywhere. You always got to look at new ways of doing things. That's exactly what this panel's about. And certainly I'll say this, as Treasurer, I relied heavily, just as great to see the new Treasurer is, in terms of external advice coming in, not just that you receive from the government.
But in some terms, we don't have very many women around your cabinet table.
True.
How many women do you have on your staff, in your office, in senior advising positions?
Deputy Chief of Staff is a woman, and my senior policy advisors are women. I can't give you the exact number, but there's a lot. And that's
is it a 50-50 split?
I don't know. I will check if you have interest in that. I will provide that to you actually.
Premier, do you think there have been more people with a seat, more women with a seat at the
Well, so my senior media advisor is my senior media advisor is a woman. My deputy chief of staff is a woman. I have senior women in my roles in my office, and also in the senior bureaucracy and Department of Premier and Cabinet.
Do you think if there had been more women over the past 10 years with a seat at the government table, that you'd have to still go outside and go externally to get the views of an expert panel of women? I mean, would it have benefited you over this time if there had been more women at the table? Perhaps some of these solutions could have come earlier.
We've had for 5 years a great Premier who was a woman here in New South Wales, and Gladys Berejiklian. To somehow suggest that this government has not been focused on women is completely wrong. We've been led by the top by one of the finest women that's ever served in public life in New South Wales, and we've been very blessed to have Gladys over that period of time. If we're going to talk, if we want to rehash the issues of the past in relation to the Liberal Party organisation itself, we've always said that we should have greater representation in the Parliament. We've got some by-elections on the weekend, I note, for observers. 3 of the 4 candidates for the Liberals and Nationals are women. I'm very proud of that, and I hope they're successful, because I know that they will make a great contribution to their electorates and to the New South Wales Parliament. I've always said from day one of my premiership that the more diverse your cabinets are and the more diverse your parliaments are, the better public policy making you'll have on the outback, off the back of it. If you want your parliaments, to very much as closely as possible represent the people of our state. And the more we can do that, the more we can encourage that, the better. But where I sit as Premier, my job, and whether it's in relation to women's issues or a whole range of issues, is to think innovatively and look at better ways of doing things. You know, there's no doubt, whilst you're in public life, you don't get. It's a significant privilege and opportunity to serve in these roles. And while you're here, you want to make a difference. And I've seen through many governments the same old tired policies come through. Now, I think our government has an incredibly strong track record across the board in a whole range of areas. But the initiative today, I think, goes alongside past initiatives of this government in looking outside the box and setting up expert panels to provide advice to the government for better public policy thinking. And the Treasurer, to his credit, is following the same suit. We had, when I was Treasurer for 5 years, a whole range of initiatives, a whole range of think tanks, a whole range of policy panels that came through to provide advice that was outside the box. I've spoken previously about the school hours. I've spoken previously just late last year in relation to the challenges of early child education and childcare and family policy. I've said from the outset as Premier of this state that I want to be a Premier for families. That's mums and dads. That's ensuring that New South Wales is the best place for women to work, to run a business and to raise a family. And that's true for all families. That's what we want. We want to have economic empowerment. We want to look at new ways of doing things. The world is moving fast. The world today is very different to what it was when we came to office in 2011. And I think if you look around the country, I believe that our government will lead an innovation revolution in our state that will break down barriers, that probably makes it a little bit uncomfortable at times. But if we don't move, governments are always slow, just the nature of the beast. But we shouldn't just be fast followers, we should lead the way, and I believe that's the government that we have here in our state.
Premier, you said today, Premier.
You rightly pointed to the school day and school hours as a problem and an economic barrier for women. What is your plan to change that? Because obviously, you know, it's also, you've also got to balance educational outcomes with, you know, children being at school for a longer day. What's the plan?
We're already trialling, and the Education Minister is trialling in certain schools changes to the school hours. And is already reaching out to schools in relation to that, being part of that trial. It's not something you obviously can... When something's been the same way for I don't know how long, decades on decades on decades. I mean, the world in the 1950s is very different the world in the 1950s is very different to the world that we live in today. And you can't just overturn that overnight. What you need to do as a government is to trial new things, to look at new ways of doing things, to set up panels like the Treasurer and the Minister for Women have done today, to look outside the box. As Sam Mostyn has said, to be bold and brave. I don't want small little tweaking around the edge policy ideas. I want revolutionary ideas that trailblaze a new approach for our state when it comes to women's issues and also supporting families across New South Wales. I've said from the start, this is going to be a government focused on families, focused on parents, focused on household budgets and continuing that strong infrastructure investment of this state. That might mean we might make mistakes from time to time. It doesn't bother me. I want to make sure we look outside the box, we try new things. You can't just do that across the board. You've got to trial them. You've got to receive feedback and take the community with you. This panel today that has been established will come up with ideas, and the government will look at closely every single one of them. What we can do, we will.
Premier, on those trials.
Family vouchers, is there any concern about people who aren't eligible accessing them? How does the app know whether or not I have school-aged children?
Because you've got to register that. We've always had with every one of those vouchers checks and balances in place. That's the case with this one as well. I tried to do it this morning, but it was down because everyone was getting on there to get their vouchers. I'm sure I've spoken to the Customer Service Minister and it's going to be back up very shortly. So I know there's a lot of interest out there to get it, and that's important because cost of living, household budgets, and putting downward pressure is something this government is completely focused on. And no one has done more to put downward pressure on household budgets than this government. And to all those initiatives for families, whether it's our first lap swimming program, whether it's our Dine and Discover vouchers, whether it's our parents vouchers we've launched today, our accommodation vouchers that are coming up soon, our Friday lunch vouchers to reinvigorate the Sydney CBD and the Parramatta CBD are soon to come on board. But the checks and balances are in place to ensure that through your Service New South Wales app, where your personal details are registered, clearly, if you're not a parent, you can't get a parent voucher.
On trial.
Yeah,
Thank you. We've been talking to doctors and surgeons who believe that we should go back as soon as possible to elective surgery pre-COVID levels, so back to 100%. When are we likely to hear the next announcement on when it's going to be scaled up once again?
Well, as soon as possible. I want to see non-urgent elective surgery back in all hospitals as soon as we can. As Treasurer, over the last 2 years, it was a real focus of ours when you had the Alpha outbreak, the Delta outbreak, and at both those points in time, we had to suspend non-urgent elective surgery, just like every other state around the country. And each time we did that, we invested significant amounts to bring back that non-urgent elective surgery as quickly as possible. I was down in Wagga Wagga in December at Wagga Wagga Base Hospital, and they got the backlog. They were able to achieve the removal of that non-urgent elective surgery backlog to zero, I think, very, very quickly, and led the entire state. So I know our hospital system is under pressure. When we suspended the non-urgent elective surgery in December last year, was it January or December? When did we suspend it? January? January 10. When we suspended non-urgent elective surgery on January 10 this year, we planned on that being suspended based on the modelling that we had received until mid-February. Now we're able to bring that forward, and where we can bring further non-urgent elective surgery forward in our public hospitals, we will do that as well. Obviously, I'll take the health advice in relation to that matter, and as quickly as we can, we will. But I'll note this point, that no other state has been able to bring back that non-urgent elective surgery outside of New South Wales. Why? Because we've invested strongly in our system, in our public health system here in our state. We increased substantial capacity in our hospitals and in our ICU capacity over 10 years. In addition to that, $4 billion at the outset of the pandemic that's put us in this very strong position for the challenges that come our way. But the answer to your question, Kenny, is as soon as we can, we will. We've already brought it forward to date in the private health system, and as soon as we can roll that out across the board, we will do that. And the early signs that we're seeing in our hospital system across the state is incredibly pleasing and reassuring based on the scenario models that we provided early this year.
Premier, just on trial.
We're on the front foot there. Does that mean February 28th, when these other health orders for masks and working from home, when that expires, will that continue, or will you lift those restrictions?
Will what continue?
The mask rules, for instance, or the mandate to work from home.
So we would say that we're on track. We rolled those restrictions over from January 27 to February 27. We did so to take a precautionary approach as we were moving through the Omicron wave. The government hasn't meant to make its decision in relation to that, but if I look across the state right now, we're in a very strong position. I mean, we had WA talk about shadow lockdowns. Well, I don't see anyone walking around Sydney and regional New South Wales would see that is completely untrue. But if you walk down a local street in Perth, you might see there's not much activity happening. Lockdowns are not the answer. What was the answer? As we've seen, not just in Australia, but globally, the Omicron variant was incredibly contagious. What was the answer was, as we move through this next phase with a highly vaccinated population, was to keep society open. Now that's come with some transitional challenges. But ultimately, despite being a difficult path to take, it's the right path to take. We're seeing confidence returning, just like we saw confidence returning after the Delta outbreak. And New South Wales is back on the front foot. Confidence is returning. New South Wales is back on the front foot. Confidence is returning. That's an incredibly positive thing, not just for businesses, for mums and dads across the state. And the key focus for us, as I said in relation to the rolling over of those restrictions, Clinton, from January 27 to February 27, was when we looked down the priorities of what's most important to the people of our state, there were two key things we wanted to achieve. Bringing back non-urgent elective surgery as quickly as we could, which we've achieved. Still more to go, but we are well on track and have brought that forward. And the second point was getting kids back into the classroom safely, which we've achieved. Yep. So those two key focuses of the government are the most important things we can do. And I've spoken about the importance of kids in the classroom, but also for mums and dads across the state, because we know when you have school closures, an additional 5% of our entire workforce are also taken out of the system. So that was why it was so important. Yes, there's been challenges, but I'm very confident about where we sit. Ash.
We're facing four by-elections on Saturday. Labor clearly wants to make this a referendum on how you handle the Omicron wave. Are you concerned by that?
No. What I'm concerned about day in, day out is doing what's right. You don't shoot for populist politics in the middle of a pandemic. And our job, and you get elected to public life, every single day I'm focused on doing what is right for the people of our state. And I've learnt through 2 years of this pandemic that every single day there'll be different opinions in relation to the way that governments are handling a pandemic. And I accept that. When I take a step back and I look at our state and I look at our country compared to anywhere else in the world, we have a lot to be proud of. We have a very low death rate, our hospital system is strong, and our economy is recovering better than probably any economy anywhere in the world. And why is that important? Because it's important to have people in jobs so they can provide for their families, provide opportunity and prosperity. I look around the world and see schools that are closed. We have countries that are mortgaging off their kids' future. We're not doing that here in New South Wales. We worked around the clock tirelessly to get a system in place that ensured kids were back in the classroom on day one. Now, Labor can play politics. That doesn't bother me. By-elections will be by-elections. You get into public life, and every single day, if you're in these roles, you've got to be focused on doing what's right and looking after the people of our state. That's what I'm focused on.
Premier, just on the school changes.
There was an awful case of a family not able to see their dying mother in Campbell County. So I understand you actually intervened in that personally.
No, I spoke to her yesterday, and it's certainly doing this thing.
Is it acceptable for families to be treated like that? There's all this drama out nursing homes. Why is it happening in our hospitals?
Well, it shouldn't have happened. It was a tragic situation, and when I spoke to the family yesterday, I apologise unreservedly on behalf of the government. As difficult as that was for her and the family, what's most important is that it doesn't happen again. And I know that the Health Minister also spoke with Gail yesterday, and there's been changes that have been put in place. I know that the health system is under pressure, and the guidelines that are in place, and when rules change, that mistakes get made, but that situation should never occur.
Premier, just on the changes with the trials with school hours, Premier.
Yeah.
What exactly is being trialled at the moment, and when will we move out of trials?
There's a number of schools, and I haven't got them in front of me, that I know when we announced this reform as following the budget, where there were certain schools who wanted to look at ways in which they could change their hours to suit their families. Now, it's obviously a difficult change because we've had 9 till 3, but in my view, 9 to 3 doesn't work. You've also got challenges with before and after school care. You've got childcare issues, you've got early childhood educations, and I expect that some of the work that Sam Austin will do is with her panel, we'll look at ways in which balancing those areas could be improved, and we'll work through. But there's some schools, and I'll come back to you. I'll speak to Sarah Mitchell this morning and get you the schools that are involved. But there'll be learnings from that, and every school is different. I mean, there are so many different elements there. When you change the school hours, you've also got to change the transport hours. There's a whole lot of elements to it, and it's not having a one-size-fits-all policy. This is all about, historically, Governments build services around themselves, not around people. Now, we have done a lot of work, particularly through Service New South Wales, is taking government services away from being focused on government and being focused on the people who we represent day in, day out. Now, whether that's through Service New South Wales and building building the online platform that makes service delivery easier, so you don't have to come to government to be served, government comes to you. That's what we should be looking at and doing, and having a lot more innovative solutions than what we've seen in the past. We have done a lot through this space, both in the back office work, but now we've got but more importantly, through Service New South Wales, to the front office as well. And I'd like to see that approach of what we've achieved there across the board.
And on that, Premier, you said in the Daily Telegraph today that getting back to the office is a civic duty. Will your government encourage its public servants back into the office?
We did that last time. We did that last time. You can hardly ask people to come back to the city if you're not asking your public servants to come back to the city, particularly in Parramatta, where we have a substantial office space there for our public service. But we want to do that safely. But we want to bring life back. When cities go well across our state goes well and the country goes well off the back of it, I'd like to see people come back to the office as quickly as possible. We did that last year. And we'll do it again. And I'm completely confident because I know what works. I know it worked last time and it'll work again.
Premier, when do you want people to come back to the office? Because at the moment, the government's strong advice to people, and pointing from your media release, people are encouraged to continue to work from home where possible.
And that's
so when will that advice change?
Well, that's in place until February 27th. And that's why this summit, which we've called today, is in advance of that. Because what I want to see is that you have the ideas on the table, and when we do make those changes, we're ready to go. And it was incredibly successful. And I know our government's had issues with in the past, the City of Sydney Council. We don't always see eye to eye, but I tell you this, the constructive relationship that I've had with the Lord Mayor Clover Moore during this period of time, I believe has really helped our city. Because working together, council and state government, in driving better outcomes and in partnership, shared funding, being innovative, sharing ideas has resulted in a booming city off the back of lockdowns. Now what we're going to see is the same thing happen again. I work incredibly closely with the Mayor and the local member, Alex Greenwich. It's a partnership between business, the public service, to get those outcomes, but you don't wait. Poor governments wait until you make the change. Good governments get in front of the curve. That's exactly what we're doing. We'll have this summit on Friday, so I'm confident as those restrictions are lifted, we're ready to go, and it's boom time back in Sydney.
Will that be though at the end of the month?
Well, I'm not going to give a running commentary on that point. What I'd say is that is the date we've set being the 27th of February. Everything's going well. Confidence is back, but we need people to get boosted. The vaccination rate is strong. That puts downward pressure on the health system. It's not just a health crisis. It has many elements to it. And we want our kids back at school. We've achieved that. We want to bring back non-urgent elective surgery. We're achieving that. We want businesses to be flourishing again. That's back on track. So from all accounts, right across the board, New South Wales is back on the front foot in a very strong space.
And are you willing to offer grants or other financial enticements to private companies to help them to encourage people back into their offices?
Probably not. These are taxpayer dollars. And my view is I need to lead by example and have the public service return, and I'll encourage the private sector return because it's a civic duty that we all work together. Now, obviously, that'll be a matter for Cabinet, but probably won't be advising that. I think the Treasury will be happy with it.
Ask a couple of questions. Thanks, everybody. The panel about
Yeah, I think so. That'd be great.
Thank you. Sorry to delay everybody. Just on the issue of the childcare hours, school hours, should this be only viewed through the focus of a women's workforce review? Should this be an issue for men too?
Of course. But we haven't dealt with it, and it's become a women's issue. So until we address it full frontal and deal with it as a problem of policy and a lack of innovation and boldness, as the Treasurer has asked us to look at, then we'll keep making it a women's issue. Because the bulk of the caring, the bulk of the teaching, the bulk of care generally across our state is done by women. 75 to 80% of all care roles in the state, whether they're paid, underpaid or not paid, are done by women of all ages, of all cultures, of all backgrounds. And you just can't keep running on the luck of that and the commitment of women to keep doing that, to stop actually having some productive policy discussions about how we fix this. And the fix must benefit men just as it will women, because it will be about a better set of circumstances for how we operate as families, as communities. And we want more and more men doing the caring. And they will do more of the caring if the care system works. And it doesn't work because we have relied on women to hold that. We learnt through COVID that the acute nature of that care was largely taken by women. And I've described it previously as the great exhaustion. Women are exhausted across the state, but they want to be active contributors to the economic outcomes of the state, to revival of community, but they just can't keep going on the same rules with the same structural problems. Just in relation to a couple of questions you asked the Premier about government and schools and the like, at the panel, we will certainly think about government in many different ways. So there's government as a leader of policy and to set a tone of where policy could go if it was bold and ambitious and dealt with the reality of our lived experiences. That's a boldness of government, and that can be dealt with through policy, through the budgetary measures and things that government can do. This government is also one of the biggest employers in the country. It has one of the biggest workforces, and again, large numbers of women who will benefit from policies and processes that elevate women as leaders, women as equal contributors, and where there's good flexible work that's equally available to the state's workers as it is anywhere else. So government as employer, government as economic driver. The government can actually make new rules of procurement for the companies that it wants to trade with and deal with, and ensure that those companies and individuals who want to actually benefit from the state and from taxpayers' money lift their game on women's representation, on gender pay gaps, on the issues that affect women's economic advantage and participation. And they're big drivers that a state government can do, particularly of the scale of New South Wales. So you see government operating on so many different levels, and that's why the beauty of the review, working with the Treasurer, the Premier and Ministers and Treasury, is we can start to make some down payments on that through the budget, but have a much broader conversation about what a state could look like if we truly elevated and respected the role of women across the society and within the economy.
Governments do reviews, summits, conferences. When do you expect, or when do you hope that you will see actual change as a result of the work?
So we have a complex set of things to deal with. We're dealing with a very tight time frame for budget. You know better that the budget measures have got to be dealt with very quickly. I've said to the Treasurer, particularly that, and to Treasury officials, we have got to make sure that nothing that appears in the 2022 budget is inconsistent with a broader set of objectives that the review has been set, and that anything there should be seen as a down payment that says, here's where we're going. And you get a clear signal, people across New South Wales get a clear signal that women matter in the economy. And so we will help deal with things on the short term. So I would be hopeful, as the panel is hopeful, and the experts will bring together with us, that we'll see some evidence of that in the 2022 budget. But I don't expect you could see all of it, because we're talking about long-term structural reform, and that will take the next 5 to 10 years. So I think this is the first budget of many, and of policy objectives that the Minister for Women, the Minister for Education, the Premier, the Treasurer, working with the Cabinet, can actually embrace to say, we'll start to see a whole-of-government response that says women in New South Wales are respected, there's a respect at work agenda, they're paid properly, they're able to get into the higher paying jobs where there's good flexible work, they become leaders. To the question about women around the table, of course, we've had a paucity of women around every table that's had decisions about our lives. I've seen that in business, you see that across our community. You've got a government that's saying that's now important, and again, government as driver of policy and leadership can actually push private sector, other businesses, to elevate women. And of course, here we are in the hub of innovation with an innovation leader, a woman leading innovation superannuation. So you'd expect to see some support for those kind of small women in small business who are driving revolution in the way we think about women in the economy.
And Sam, would you be advising, do you support the concept of moving away from a 9-3 school model? I mean, is that really the answer that can help fix some of these inequalities?
Well, I think if we're going to address early childhood education and care. So if we care about children as much as we care about families and the roles of women and men as parents, you have to look at all issues. Now, this review is looking at structural barriers to women's participation, and we look particularly at the affordability and accessibility of early childhood education and care. That, of course, intersects with the school day system and long day care, and I think we'll be making recommendations about where you could take that, but I can't commit the panel today. It's early discussions, but I'm hearing very clearly from the government that that is up for discussion and that there are complex issues at play here, federal-state relations. You know, it will take some boldness around thinking about how the school system feels about that. As I've said, and a large proportion of teachers involved in the school system are women who also have their families to think about. So this is a complex, multi-layered issue, but we shouldn't be frightened of it. And boldness and bravery that we've been asked to deal with will be evident in our advice. But Treasury is also doing a power of work and already engaged with a lot of experts around the state, getting new information in about what we can do in the course of this budget.
Thanks, everyone.